And this, the second webinar in a short series, a collaborative series between the three projects, PALOMERA, DIAMAS and Craft OA. The first webinar that we had was in June of last year. And that, again, was creating community-driven pathways to equitable, open, scholarly publishing. And we've chosen that as a kind of tagline for all of our webinars, because this is really the sort of banner under which we come together, because it's the central goals that we share as projects, because each project focuses on a slightly different aspect of open scholarly communication. But we're all interested in these sorts of developments being community-driven and in them being equitable and open. And so we conceived of today's session, as you see that the sort of subtitle is "Where Are We Now?" It's a kind of an update on the developments that the three projects have been working on since we last spoke. As when we spoke in June of last year, each project was in a fairly early stage. And so it was kind of an introductory session to let you know a bit about what we were working on. And today is much more of a kind of in-depth update, hopefully, on what each project has been doing, on some key developments. And it's also our opportunity to hear a bit from you.
Lucy, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Have I been muted for a while?
No, just a second.
Oh, great. Okay. I don't quite know how that happened. Anyway. So I was talking about the importance of community-driven pathways, and this being sort of central for the projects. And so, as well as speaking to you today about what the projects have been working on, we also would like to hear from you as well. And so each project has been working in different ways on engaging with the different communities that are involved in open scholarly publishing. And today is another opportunity for us to do that. So one way we'd like to do that is by using Mentimeter. So you might be familiar with Mentimeter, and if not, I'll explain how it works. But each project has got some questions that they'd like to ask you, the audience, if you would kindly respond and let us know your thoughts. And also, of course, any questions you've got, please drop them in the chat, and we'll do our best to respond to those. So I'm going to click over onto the next slide and just introduce the session in a bit more detail. We've got 90 minutes today. And we have presentations from each of the three projects. So Craft OA, we'll hear from Clara Arngo and Margot Bargier. From DIAMAS, we'll hear from Jan-Erik Fransvog. And from PALOMERA, we'll hear from Gabriella Banista. And at the end of each of those presentations, we'll have a short Mentimeter session. And then we're delighted to be joined by Victoria Chukala from the European Commission, who's going to talk and sort of present the policymaker perspective on what we're doing. And I think that's more or less all from me. I will return at the end of the Craft OA presentation with some Mentimeter slides. And so without further ado, I'll hand over to Clara and Margot. Thank you very much.
Hi, Margot, do you want to be the first speaker, or?
I can, while you get yourself going, I do a bit of an introduction to Craft OA. So the Craft OA project stands for Creating a Federated Technology for Open Access Publishing. And our main aim is to bring all these wonderful Diamond Open Access journals that are out there into more maturity, because if we look at the general picture, it seems as if the commercial sector is the most important in publishing. If you look at the numbers, that's definitely not true. It's just that they create more visibility for themselves. They create more financial problems. That's why there's more attention on them. And we think that the Diamond Open Access sector is underestimated. It's much larger than it is. It has more meaning. But it needs technological maturity, because many of the journals and publishers are doing the same that a larger publisher would do. They run a platform, and on that platform is maybe just 1 or 2 or 3 journals. One of the things that we aim to introduce is absolutely more visibility for Diamond Open Access. And for those of you who are not so familiar with Diamond Open Access in general means scientific literature is freely available online. Somebody needs to pay for the production because it's not through the subscription, meaning that it's not financed by libraries. The commercial model means that authors need to bring money, either their own or from their institution. That's the so-called article processing charges, whereas the Diamond Open Access model means that authors don't need to pay. And currently, there is the discussion going on what is actually Diamond Open Access, and the way that we perceive it in DIAMAS and CraftOA is that Diamond Open Access doesn't just mean that authors don't need to pay, but there is more to it, because this is the sector that is mainly run by institutions, by scholarly groups, by learned societies and others. And one of the things that we try to introduce is the so-called Diamond Discovery Hub, because the commercial sector has been pretty good in showcasing their journals, especially in the also commercially run indexes such as Scopus and Web of Science. And here comes the Diamond Discovery Hub, and I'm sharing my screen with you. What we have been working on is a definition of Diamond Open Access, because it has been often connotated with the absence of article processing charges makes something already diamond, meaning it's supposed to be the good side of open access, the non-commercial side. However, we see that also larger commercial publishers have many journals that don't charge article processing fees because they are covered by ministries or by the industry. So our definition, and this is work in progress, and keep an eye out. We'll be inviting you for feedback on our definition of diamond, because we will be using this on a platform, and hopefully others can also use the diamond definition. So one of the things is it has to be a journal, means it has to have a persistent identifier, currently an ISSN, hopefully in the future also title level DOI. It doesn't charge any mandatory fees to authors, because what we also see is that journals showcase themselves with saying they don't have a article processing charge, but they will be sneaking in with, oh, by the way, there's submission charge, or you have to become a member of some group or whatsoever. So no mandatory fee for authors. That's what qualifies for Diamond. Issues open licenses for the content and makes that visible, and is scholar-led. And this is the most difficult thing to check. And this is where we will be struggling, and we will need help from the communities. What is scholar-led? Is it scholar-owned, scholar-led, scholar-driven? So this is why we are still a work in progress, and does not limit authorship to a certain institution. And the reason why we are working on this is we will create a registry and a showcase for Diamond Open Access journals. And of course, an editorial group will need to check, is this a Diamond journal, or is it just that it seems to have no article processing charges? And we will be seeing exceptions, because what we realized when we started to work on the definition, that things happen on a continuum. While has an ISSN or not is a yes or no decision, but when it comes to is scholar-led, scholar-driven, comes from the institutional sector, there we are. We really have to check. And in its first iteration, we will be harvesting sources that are there. That is, for instance, DIAJ, that is open air, that will be also trusted institutional publishing service providers, and also an application form. So this is going to be similar to what DIAJ does, just that the selection criteria for our Diamond Discovery Hub will be a bit different. And also, hopefully, we see things that can emerge on the Diamond Discovery Hub of CraftOA, and then from there on travel into full recognition on Directory of Open Access Journals. We need an editorial team. This will be first of all the CraftOA consortium, because many of us within our project are publishers themselves, including Göttingen University, because we also run journals. And we hope that this will not just be a formal check of data, but that it will also start a conversation with institutional publishing service providers and journals, because what we need is that we bring more trust into the system, and that more journals also identify themselves with being part of the Diamond Open Access sector. Currently, we're working on mock-ups, and if you check later on, feel free to look at these mock-ups, because we need to really build a website now, and this is what we're working on. The technical implementation is, so of course it needs to be state of the art. I don't need to read you through all of this, but two things I'd like to mention is that we have to use technology that is allows easy building, installation, but especially sustainability. So one thing, for instance, is that we will be building on open source as a default, and that it needs to be having reliable technology stacks within our consortium. It's mainly our colleagues from University of Warsaw, which have been building many of the open air technologies. So I think they know what they do. And because the Diamond Discovery Hub can't just be around for the time when Craft.OR is funded, it has to stay around afterwards. And it's something that the project, with the money of the European Commission, hands over to communities, such as present here in the webinar. And thanks for joining, everybody. And that's from my side. And with that, I hope I have paved the ground for Clara, because all of what we have been doing in this Diamond Discovery Hub has a foundation. And that is, for instance, the work that has been done in the DIAMAS project. And I'm happy that we're here later on, but especially the work that Clara is leading in our Craft.OR project, and that is the work package 3 presentation now. Now I have to somehow, Clara, can you simply take over yourself?
I think I have.
Okay. It's because it looks so much like mine. I'm happy.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. I hope you can all see my screen. Thank you, Margot, for the introduction. So I'm going to be as brief as possible because I am aware I have 5 minutes. So this is going to be a summary of what we've done so far in Work Package 3. Let me see. Okay. Work Package 3 consists of 3 main tasks. The first one is was led by DOAJ, the second one was led by TSV, and the third one is currently led by TIB. The first task was about the development of open access publishing interoperability framework. The second one is a report on challenge and gap identification for open access journals and platforms. And the third one is about creating training materials. Let me show you. The first 2 deliverables have already been delivered. The first one was mid last year, and the second we delivered right at the end of the year. And the main outcomes of the first deliverable, the report on standards for best publishing practices and technical requirements, was the first organized attempt to compare the requirements set by policies and services. And I think that it provided a clear path for the Diamond Open Access Journals community to follow. Then, after this first task, we started with the second deliverable, and which is a gap analysis that has revealed 2 major findings. Firstly, there is a significant scope for growth in the adoption of recommended standards by various open access Diamond journals. And secondly, the gaps that were identified are primarily due to technological challenges, limitations in resources and expertise, and also a general lack of awareness. Thanks to these 2 first reports, we are now working towards our milestone, which is going to happen in month 30. Let me show you what the next steps are. So we are currently gathering an overview on synergies with both Craft.OR and DIAMAS. And we are also, excuse me. So we are now trying to contribute with other DIAMAS work packages, such as Work Package 4, Task 4.3, which I am leading. So I have 2 hats here. And I think that this is mainly the summary of what we have been done so far. And we also have some connections with the Diamond Discovery Hub, of course, with task 4.3, metadata quality and extensibility, and with summer school, the tech event, and the curriculum of work package 2. And connections with sisters projects like DIAMAS, as I mentioned, work package 4, work package 2, and work package 3. I don't want to go into the detail of each of the connections because I would go over my 5 minutes. But if you have any questions, I'm very happy to try to answer them. And that's it from me.
Thanks, Clara, and thanks, Margot, as well. I am going to share the Mentimeter slides now. And let's see if we can make this work. So I don't know if people will have used Mentimeter before, but it's a way to interact with some questions that the different projects would like to ask. And so you can do it in one of two ways. You can use your phone to scan the QR code on the screen, or you can use your browser, go to menti.com, and then it'll prompt you to enter a code. And the code for this presentation is 84216649. And that code will be at the top of each slide. So if you come out of it for any reason, you just go to menti.com to find it again and use that code. So the first question that the Craft OA project would like to ask is this one. How far are your needs of indexing Diamond OA covered by the concept of the DDH? So it's quite a big question. And so I guess we'll need to give people a little bit of time just to input some responses to that. And maybe while people are doing that, I could just ask Margot and Clara. There was a question in the chat from Ross, and he said, I'm not quite sure if I ever understood the point of having a title level DOI. So I guess this is the ISSN number that you mentioned, Margot. Do people still do this, and what is the value?
I think one of the values is that usually in the ISSN there sits rich information on a journal. Where has it been registered, by whom, and what language does it publish in? The point is that the ISSN entry doesn't resolve to any place. It sits there. You can, of course, access their API, whereas if you register a title level DOI for a journal, for a series, then there is a persistent identifier for that entity. And we've been all trained that you can only register DOIs for content. But in the case of a journal, yes, the journal is not the content, but the journal is the container for the content. So it makes sense to use title level DOI because especially the Crossref DOIs offer a world to other services such as event data, Crossmark, or also services such as Altmetric who pick up these DOIs. They won't pick up ISSNs, and we haven't seen that many neat little services coming up around the ISSN that we've seen around the DOI. So why not? I mean, it doesn't do any harm. And I think it helps because we can also do some resolving on it, meaning that maybe it's easier to also somehow update your DOI entries. That's at least my lay understanding. I have only learned about it some weeks ago, and that's work in progress. So if you think that's a totally super bad idea and you have good reasons for it, then please drop me some lines, because then it's off the record again. But for the time being, we think we should have ISSN and title level DOI if possible.
I think in the chat, Ross has added that if so few journals have them, it may not be very helpful. So perhaps it's a case of getting more people using them. And then we've had quite a few responses to this question. Thank you. Some people not sure, maybe wanting more information. Some people thinking that it sounds promising and wanting to assess it a bit more. So I'll skip on to the next question. Is your situation well represented by the reports on best practices and technical standards? I always like these ones as a presenter because you get instant responses. People don't have to type things in. Apparently getting yes, fighting it out with not sure, but no no's yet, which is good. And then just because of time constraints, I'm going to skip on to the final question from CraftOA. How does the gap analysis related to the report relate to your experience? So another big question from CraftOA. What I may do is I'll give a minute or so for people to respond now, but I'll leave this slide open. So if people want to write a bit more, then you can do so.
And it's also an invitation to actually read our deliverables. They are all available on the website of CraftOA. And you're always free to give us feedback also later on.
Yeah, thanks, Margot. I think it's very much the hope of all the projects that this is potentially the start of a conversation. So yeah, do feel that you can get in touch with any of us, and I'll be sharing some contact details at the end about how to do that. Clara, did you want to add something?
Yeah, also for the ones that don't want to read the whole report, Sona has made a very nice summary of both deliverables. I think that she already posted the summaries in the chat, but I'm going to post them again. So there you are.
Thanks very much, Clara. And thanks to CraftOA. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, although the slide will remain open if you want to add more responses. And I'm going to hand over to DIAMAS and to Jan Erik.
Yeah, you're too quick for me. Thank you for having me here. I'll try to find my presentation and try to share my screen here.
Apologies, maybe you were writing a response on the slide and I hand it over to you.
I hope you will that you see my presentation now. I'm Jan Erik Fransvåg from UiT, the Arctic University of Norway. I've had the pleasure of heading the work package 2 in the DIAMAS project for 15 months. And DIAMAS is developing institutional open access publishing models to advance scholarly communication. I don't expect you to remember that either. Hopefully the presentations will be shared afterwards, so we won't have to note down the long links that you will find in some of my slides. It could be useful for looking at things later. Background of the project is that there's a lot of early research that has showed problems with the structure of open access publishing. In the Open Access Diamond Journal study, we found a wide archipelago of relatively small journals serving diverse communities, which looked like a problem. And Diamond OA, that report looked upon, is an important part of institutional publishing. We thought at the outset, and we still believe that. DIAMAS is to look at institutional publishing, all kind of modes, but the Diamond, APC, paper-based, subscription, etc. But Diamond is still a backbone here. The work we did in Work Package 2, well, some 40 competent and interested persons from around 20 organizations participated. Nearly all partners in DIAMAS, and actually some people from outside DIAMAS were part of this work. We started in September 22 and delivered a report at the end of November 23, quite recently. There's little to build on. There was no data previously collected on institutional publishing as such. No organizations geared to that. So we had to start from scratch, and we initiated a large survey. In the process, we more or less coined a central term, the institutional publishing service provider, covering institutional publishing activities, covering service providing to such institutional publishing, and entities combining institutional publishing and service providing to themselves and or to others. Sorry. What we did, we created a survey trying to cover many aspects. Too many, our respondents says, too little, our participants said. We tried identifying possible institutional publishers and service providers in ERA. The data we had was skewed towards open access journal publishing. That's where we come from, many of us. But we engaged networks we knew of. We sent out more than 5,000 emails to specific addresses in late March, early May last year in 10 different languages. And we also sent out email lists and to organizations asking them to redistribute to their members. So I would guess some 10,000 emails were sent out during this process. We kept Turkey out of this because of the earthquake in January last year. The report on Turkey is forthcoming, hopefully in a month or two. One lesson learned was that the direct emails didn't work. It was the mass emailings to list organizations that gave responses, not individual emails. If just in case anyone else wants to do something on the same scale, don't do it. Well, what did we get? We get nearly 700 responses that we could use for an analysis. There was an uneven geographical distribution. See the circles on the map. The larger the circles, the more responses. But what we find is that most countries were adequately represented. We think that a major part of IPSPs are represented, but as always, the smallest ones are vastly underrepresented. 3/4 of respondents were institutional publishers, 1/4 were service providers. This is a self-assessment, and we see that there are problems with what is an IP and what is an SP, and if you do both, are you an SP, are you an IP? We see that from responses that people chose differently without any difference in their background. 90% of our respondents publish journals, but most publish relatively few, less than 5. A major finding is that countries are much more different than regions are. We had planned doing regional analysis, but we discarded that idea after looking at the data. Neighboring countries could be very different, while countries far apart could be much more alike each other. What we see is that organization of scholarly publishing activities on a national scale is very important. We're talking about support and administrative structures. We're talking about what kind of networks and organizations are there in the country, and what are the funding opportunities and how are they organized. This all plays very much into how the respondents actually live and responded to the survey. To look at finances and organization, more than two-thirds are non-commercial public organizations. Of course, service providers are more likely to be private companies than institutional publishers. Roughly 60% of them are part of a parent organization. That has consequences. We mainly talk about small-scale activities, even if you have global actors also in the survey. And mainly these respondents are heavily dependent on voluntary and in-kind contributions. The diamond model is very common. APC is used as a revenue stream by 19% of open access journals publishers. That is not to say that 19% of journals are financed, but if you're a large institutional publisher, if one of your journals have APCs, you have answered yes to this question. So a maximum of 19% of journals are covered by APC. And surprisingly, the voluntary author contributions are used by nearly 1/4 of all respondents. That was, to me, a very new fact. I thought I knew most things from before, but this is something I learned. More than half of all publishers that only publish Diamond rely on fixed and permanent funding from a parent organization, and 20% on some periodically negotiated funding. And they all place high reliance on this funding from the parent organization. 31% rely on content and print sales. We see there is a lot of paper sold. We see subscriptions, etc. But this is not a very important income stream. They put low reliance on this. And we see that some 70% would consider cooperating with others in order to save costs, at least in some areas, mostly on the technical and support side of publishing. And I think this is important because this is something we need to do and to try to bring on. Open science is important. 3/4 use the double anonymous peer review, which is the gold standard. 17% use open peer review, but another 30% are willing to implement this in the future. I think many of them are waiting for open peer review to be better implemented in the open journal system, which is the most common publishing tool for those published journals, at least. Among our respondents, 90% of journal output is open access, 76% of conference output, and 58% of academic books. In Eastern Europe, 97% of journals are open access, and this is really an impressive number. We also see that academic journals is the most important output. More than 90% of our respondents use this format. And that is a bit of problem is that when something is so important, all the debate tends to rotate around that single format of output. And in books are still there, and there are conference output, etc. Let's not forget that. 87% adhere to open access or open science policy at some level, national, institutional, or their own policy. There is a variation between countries. National policies are not really important in all countries, even if they have them. And policies is most developed and most important for open access journals. We see that less than half consider the content well indexed, satisfying technical and non-technical participation criteria is a problem for around 60% of participants. Paying for membership and for recurring charges, for instance, Crossref and Crosscheck, is a problem for more than 40% of respondents. And of course, the problem is bigger the smaller the institutional publisher is. And elements of equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging is generally not well implemented. I think I could say that we are on a scale between bad and really bad. That's where most of us belong. Some takeaways. The typical IP is small and rather alone. They need better and more stable and more reliable, and at least not to forget long-term financing instead of spending their resources hunting for small amounts of money. They need partners to cooperate with, and they're willing to cooperate. They need support. The competence must be made available. They need advice on best practices, and they need support in order to implement these various practices and options that are there. But we see a strong willingness here to align with open science practices and good publishing practices. The will is well. There are some outputs available now. There's a treasure trove found at our Zenodo site. And this is a list of what I think is the most important outputs. They're, of course, from Work Package 2. Those in bold are the most important ones. We have the full landscape report, which is nearly 250 pages, plus country reports. This is for those with the special interests. To paraphrase reviewer number 2, this will not be a blockbuster. It's too long, contains too much numbers, graphs, etc. So we decided we wanted to engage some of our project partners that hadn't been authors and didn't feel some paternalship to contents in the landscape report to write a synopsis, which is also here. That is the readable version of the landscape report that I hope many of you will find and read. We also publish data and things like that, so a good reading. And if you're not tired of listening to me, you can listen to Sona and me on a podcast that discusses the European landscape of institutional publishing. And I think I will say thank you and make myself available for the questions.
Thanks very much, Jan-Erik. Some really rich information in that presentation. Thank you. I'm going to share again the Mentimeter slide. So again, the code at the top there is if you need to be reminded to join the presentation. You just go to menti.com and put that code in. But DIAMAS have asked a couple of questions as well. So this is the first thing, is which area of the landscape report is most interesting to you? And of course, you may not have read the report yet, but potentially you might have some ideas based on what Jan-Erik was just saying. Is there a particular area of this report that you would be particularly interested in or have been particularly interested in?
Well, these are chapters in the report, but I hope the chapter titles tells you a bit about the content at least.
No surprise to see costs is a popular one, and so is country reports and open science practices.
And I see that equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging confirms well to the findings of the report. There.
As an editor, I'm a bit sad that editorial quality hasn't had any votes yet, but maybe people feel that they're managing that side of things well. So. Okay, thanks everyone. I'm going to skip on to the next question. Does the landscape report present information that is new to you? And again, I guess if you haven't read it yet, then the sort of digest that Jan Erik was able to give, it certainly had some information that was new to me.
This is probably a question better asked after everyone's read at least the synopsis, but I hope my presentation gave some idea.
And remember, if you've got questions for Jan Erik or for any of our speakers, please drop them in the chat and we can either address them now or we can address them towards the end when we have a bit more time for some discussion. Okay, I think that may be the 2 questions from DIAMAS. Yes, it is. So I'll stop sharing my screen. And if there's nothing else for Jan Erik at the moment, then I will hand over to Gabriella to talk from Palomera's perspective about the work that the project's been doing. Thanks, Gabriella.
Of course, thank you. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everybody. And I will share the screen now with the presentation from our project, Palomera. I hope that you can all see it now. Yes. Okay, so today I will talk a little bit about what we already did in the Palomera project from the perspective of methodology and the knowledge base, which is already there online, available for you to see how does it look like and how does it work like. So first of all, I would like to say what was the objective or the building our knowledge base. First, we wanted to identify, contextualize, and collect data and documents relevant to the open access policies, but this time regarding open access books in our European research area. So we were focusing not only on the policies, but also on the reports, statistics, survey results, etc., etc. Then we wanted to collect the input on challenges and try to find the best practices regarding open access books from various stakeholders. And I will, of course, describe the stakeholders later from the era. And we wanted to process, tag, and of course, structuralize and make those materials that we are collecting and were collecting during the research project available to the audience, to the users. So the scope of data collection were 39 countries from European research area. We set the time span for 10 years, 2012-2022. And we described and identified 5 different stakeholders groups. So national policymakers, research funding organization, research performing organization, publishers, and libraries and infrastructure providers. And in the 39 countries, we try to identify how many of them of the stakeholders implemented or adopt the policies regarding open access books and monographs. But what is very important in our official methodology is that we wanted to use this analytical framework using PESTLE analysis, PESTLE model. So we were focusing on different, like 6 different aspects of this phenomena, So it is political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental aspects of the open access books and monographs in Europe. So we started our data collection, and you will see on this model. I know that it's very detailed, but I will describe it very briefly. How we set the data collection. We wanted to collect data sets and survey as a quantitative data, and documents and from 39 countries, and interviews as a qualitative data. After collection, we pre-analyze the data sets and survey results, and as a result, it will be available in the knowledge base as a visual report from what we find in our during our data collection. Then, when it comes to the qualitative data, we collected them in using Zotero library. We pre-code transcript from the interviews, and we are now in the analysis process, in the analysis phase, and the coded documents and excerpts with documents collected from 39 countries are available in knowledge base. Then you can see the first bibliographic data collection. As I said, this is the quantitative data that we collected. At the end of the day, we found about 4 million items that were aggregated and generate and collect. We also conduct or disseminate targeted survey to the national libraries in Austria, Belgium, Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, and all this country you can see here to learn about library data, including statistics and metadata about open access books. Then we conduct era-wide survey. At the end of the day, we collected 454 complete responses. Now the survey is analyzed in our team, and it will be available as a report from the survey with visuals in the knowledge base. At the same time, we conduct and collect the documents from 39 countries. The type of the documents that we were collecting were again policies, strategies, recommendation, all what was connected to open access books and monographs. We first identify them. Sometimes we consulted with local experts if we didn't have the researcher from the country that we were collecting the documents. Then, as you can see, we selected these relevant documents, prepared abstracts, excerpts out of them, and applying relevant tags later to analyze through the PESTLE model. And again, the outcome of the data collection is 905 documents. 462 of them are policies. We prepared 1,552 excerpts, and all the documents are available in 29 languages, and they are from 39 countries. Then, of course, we also conduct interviews. The goal was more how, undercover or understand how the open access to academic monographs in different ERA country can work, or it's working. Already, we conducted 39 individual interviews and 3 group interviews. All of them lasted around 16 minutes. We transcribed them with a happy scribe, anonymized them, validated with our interviewees, and they will be published in knowledge base. As you can see in the right corner, we have the gender breakdown that we are very proud of. It's almost half female, 24 female and 23 male participated in the interviews. We got quite nice stakeholders breakdown. And when it comes to the geographic scope, that is also something to be proud of, as we covered nearly every country that we were collecting documents in. And now the knowledge base. I wanted to show you a little bit briefly how does it look like now. And as I said, in the knowledge base, there will be a collection of documents with excerpts, reports, policies, statistics, but also like the survey results and the transcripts from interviews that we were conducting. Now we will do the live demo. I know that I don't have much time, so I will just show you how does it look like. This is the knowledge base already built. Just wait. This is how does it work. We've got all now we've got all the documents from the generated and published from the documents collected during the data collection. You can filter them using subject, for example, and this is our PESA model. So all the tags that we were using analyzing the aspects of the documents. We can search them by the country. And by the country, we were using the ISO 2-digit code. So GB stays for United Kingdom, PL for Poland, etc., etc. You can search them using the stakeholder type, like for example, research performing organization. Then the date, as I said, it is only 10 years time span, and if this document or item has a file or not. So for example, just one thing that I wanted to show you, when we entering the item, we can also see if the research team prepared some excerpts from this item, and they are also here, so we can see the most important outcome or findings from this documents, and it is all translated into English. So this is also something that it's a added value in our knowledge base. And coming back to the presentation, as if I have like 1 more minute, I just wanted to show you one more thing that was very important in our project that we conducted first, and this the two validation workshop using the researcher and other stakeholders to validate and to share some feedback about the knowledge base. We collected this feedback via Google form, but also during the workshop. And we find out that we missed some documents, and we are now collecting them again in the second round of data collection. So yeah, this is something that I wanted to add as we were thinking how to really validate our knowledge base and its functionalities. Okay, sorry for taking so much time, but thank you for your attention, and we are of course waiting for the questions.
That was great, Gabriella, thank you. And if you've got questions for Gabriella, please do drop them there in the chat. I'm going to share my trusty Mentimeter slides again. And there are a couple of questions from the Palomera project that they'd like your input on. So the first one is, how do you imagine you might be able to use the knowledge base? It's quite the resource, I think, at the moment. And so it'd be interesting to know if people do have any thoughts or ideas about ways that raw material might be useful to you. Gabrielle, I don't know if you've got any thoughts or sort of suggestions or ways that you think it might be useful or the project is hoping it could be used.
The knowledge base?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had some from the validation workshop. Our participants told us that it would be useful to have it sorry. For example, to use it for conducting the classes and lecture when you are like researcher, to use it as when building like bibliography for your research, etc., etc.
Lots of people saying that it's helpful to compare perhaps a policy in development or an existing policy with others, looking for best practices. One question on here as well, is the database accessible via an API? Do you know the answer to that one, Gabriella?
Is it
Is it accessible via an API? Can you query it with an API?
like with me, there's also like Mikael Laxo from our team, so maybe he will have the answer.
Well, basically, it's a DSpace environment, so I suppose it has OAI, PMH interfaces, but I don't think it's really that quantitative data that you would need large volumes out of it at once. But I guess we can put some thought into that as well.
Thanks, Mikael. And I'll just skip on to the next question. How does it apply to your work? So presumably this the knowledge base, how does the knowledge base apply to your work? See, this is why I prefer the little bar charts, because you always get an instant response. Building knowledge about how books are dealt with in the OA landscape. Yeah, and to know more about the existence and the content of policies in different countries and organizations. And as a potential comparative instrument. Useful for a university press. That's an interesting one.
That's very interesting, as we didn't identify so many university presses or like publishers that applying or like implementing open access policies.
Focus more on OA
As a
books.
disclaimer, it's me, and we are also part of the Palomera project. But this is one of the reasons why we joined the project, because it's important that the presses and the publishers themselves are part of the policy building process. So yes, I draw direct information from what Malte Dreyer is doing in Palomera.
Thanks, Margot. And Ross adds, I can imagine if publishers see more OA policies, they might put more effort into developing serious OA options. Yes, I think that might well happen. And it's the knowledge base is attached, as you'll be able to see from the URL, to the Open Access Books Toolkit, which is the Open Access Books Toolkit, which is shared quite widely with, I think, publishers, authors, librarians use it. So I think there's a potential dissemination route there for it as well. I think that may be that. Yes, that is the last question from Palomera. So I will stop sharing my slides and invite Victoria to speak from the policymaker perspective.
Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me. And actually, it's quite interesting for me to hear the results of the projects that we found. It's great. So yes, I will present. I will share my screen to discuss with you. Yes. Community-driven pathways to equitable scholarly publishing from the funder's perspective. Let's see if I can manage to magnify this and make the thing disappear. I think you see a black thing on top probably, which I don't know how to make disappear, I think. Sorry, hide video panel. Okay, hopefully it's this is okay, right, Lucy?
Yeah, we can see them clearly.
Okay,
Thanks.
great. Thank you so much. So I work in the unit for open science. So we're very happy to see the progress, obviously, of your projects as they greatly contribute toward community-driven pathways to and to equitable open access scholarly publishing. So I will quickly present to you some things that you probably already know, give you a little bit our timeline for working on this topic and the current broader policy content, and then go a little bit to explain what we wanted to achieve in conceiving these projects, which were conceived together as triplets at the same time. And then present to you some of my thoughts regarding the work to date of the projects and the collaboration between them, which I see is very, very good, and the future. So for us, actually, to work on this topic, we started quite early. That was in 2019, where a lot of things happened. So we published in the beginning of the year this report on the future of scholarly publishing and scholarly communication by an expert group that was led by Professor Jean-Claude Guédon. And that was quite important for us to actually show the directions and understand also the significance, of course, that institutions, and by that we mean like type of publishing that's done within universities, but not only research institutions and other relevant institutions of the broader public sphere, let's say, that have publishing activities that are not commercial in nature mostly. So they're not, established commercial publishers. As well as, of course, in 2019, we revised the 2012 recommendation on open access to and preservation of scientific information, where we, of course, recommended to member states that they also increase their support for infrastructures within the member states that support access to and preservation of scientific information, and that they are interconnected. So these, I think, are quite seminal points, and the topics were conceived actually in 2020, and we started writing them at that time. But of course, now you all know that there is a lot of work since then that has been going on in this direction for open access publishing that is what we call DIAMAND, basically, that is scholar-led and led by institutions, not for profit and without charging fees. And there's a lot of relevant work by other organizations that inspires currently our work and is undoubtedly inspiring future directions for our policy and our funding. Most recently, of course, it's the 2023 Council conclusions on scholarly publishing and the relevant ERA actions and policies that we already have underway, right? Just to remind you, those conclusions set some framework conditions for national open policies and guidelines on the size of the member states. And of course, we've already said that in the 2019 recommendation. Very importantly, they encourage the EC to propose EU-level measure for removing barriers to access and reuse of publicly funded research results and also research data. And here there's a lot of work done. Maybe some of you were in a webinar that we have yesterday with stakeholders to present a study that will be published, a big study that we commissioned that will be published in April. I think to examine exactly this from the legal perspective. So in terms of IPR in particular, what needs to be done? What is the situation? What are the bottlenecks, the obstacles? What do we need to do next in terms of policy, but also in terms of support to researchers to enable open access and remove the barriers and for data. So watch out for this. This is one of our major actions in the ERA action list. And of course, I should emphasize very much the activities on reforming research assessment, for which the Council encourages the member states, the EC, and the associated countries to engage in, along with global partners. And in this, a lot of you know that we supported the establishment of a coalition for the reform of research assessment, which now numbers really many members in the high hundreds. I haven't looked for a few weeks, but it should be 700 at least, if not 800, who participate and commit to supporting reform of research assessment within their organizations, be it research institutions, funders, etc. This is quite critical, and it's obviously very intricately connected to any form of publishing, but also especially, I think, to Diamond as well. Also, these conclusions, which are very important for national policy, but also obviously for EC policy, very straightforwardly support non-profit open access multi-format scholarly publishing models, and call to the member states and the Commission to support this development, also with aligned institutional funding policies and strategies. So to develop strategies and to fund such models. And of course, in the broader context, Open Research Europe, our own Commission-funded publishing platform, is such an example, as well as the Council conclusions encourage the member states to participate in it, and of course, to promote and support other subject-specific and national non-profit open access publishing platforms and models. Open peer review and different models of peer review are also very important in these Council conclusions. And then member states and the EC are encouraged, of course, to enhance capacity building in this direction, as well as support researchers' knowledge of IPRs, which is actually the source of, a big part of the source of the problems that we have with IPR management preventing, actually, or insufficient IPR management preventing open access. So, and of course, finally, member states are invited with the Commission to address systematically the issue of predatory publishing, and to support training on responsible, open, ethical publishing practices. So this is the broader context that influences Commission policies and directions currently, and as you see, is thoroughly aligned to the activities of your project. In-house, of course, we have, as I mentioned earlier and very briefly here, our own platform, Open Research Europe, which we developed, actually the service that we now obtained from a publisher, F1000 Research, to support our grantees. And actually now eligibility is open not just to Horizon Europe, but to all framework programs of the European Commission, and it has about 30, if I'm not mistaken, which is really good. But looking toward the future, we are looking at something that the Council conclusions are describing, and basically transitioning ORE into a collectively supported open access publishing service, much in the Diamond example, without fees, supported in its funding by funders and gradually also by research institutions, and of course bringing in research communities to drive it, to be its driving force in the future. So to do this, we are discussing now with a number of interested national funders on how to go there, and we're having a rather detailed discussion right now about how to fund it, and how to transition Open Research Europe outside of the Commission. And I think soon you will hear some of our some of the developments. And of course, we will support this with an open source infrastructure. That's the idea. And maybe some of you saw that the Commission is funding currently, we're evaluating a procurement to further develop existing open source tools for scholarly publishing, to support the needs of the future ORE. So in this way, we are seeking to contribute to this equitable open access scholarly publishing, and of course with the great involvement, right, of funders and institutions and researchers at the European scale, which I think will have been unprecedented for this type of publishing, as well as enrich and diversify the publishing landscape. And of course, this is only one action, and it's recommended as well in the Council conclusions. But of course, a main way of supporting this direction has been also our funding and funding to your projects. So I was asked to provide a little bit what the context was for the 3 topics, and it's what you already know. Of course, it's an increasingly demanding rather open access policies. So open access policies we see that they're mainstream, meaning that most funders and a lot of institutions have them. We're trying to have them aligned, and what we see is that they are increasingly becoming more demanding, meaning that, like for example in Horizon Europe, that we want not only open access but immediate open access. We want deposit in trusted repositories, not any repositories. We want machine readable license, CC BY for articles. We want research institutions and authors to retain their rights so that they're able to comply with what we ask. We want to support reproducibility of research and high quality research by actually imposing validation of research. So this means that in Horizon Europe, if your data or your underpinning materials of your paper are not open, you need to provide research to whoever's seeking to replicate your research, and that's a mandatory requirement. And finally, more specifically also for publishing, we are not supporting hybrid publishing through funds from Horizon Europe. So, and I think a lot of funders are moving in this same direction. So, and these policies, of course, are very important because they shape what is going below with institutions, the funding of national funders. So it's quite critical, and it affects, of course, it affects everyone in the ecosystem. Further, open access, of course, in publishing is, I think, envisioned now by everyone as the way of doing publishing. I mean, I don't. Us as a commission, we cannot imagine that one would publish and their publication would be closed. So there's a shift and an advancement toward the thinking of how is publishing done. It's done openly from the get-go. Also, of course, in some areas, for example, in terms with reference to open access for books and monographs, we do observe that the progress is slower there, and of course also in the relative policies, which of course have not been around also for as long. So we also wanted to support that. Add into this cocktail the fact that there is a lack of balance, let's say, in terms of the publishing, whereby a significant share of it is carried out by commercial publishers, with whom the research system is very tightly intertwined. So, of course, commercial publishers, they're good to have them around. They are service providers, of course, and they provide very valuable services. However, the research system currently is very closely attached to them for research communication, but also very importantly for the evaluation of research, of researchers, and of institutions. Finally, we see, of course, an increasing, increasing costs for publishing in open access and for accessing research, and that is a separate thing that we're not quite exactly addressing here now, but it is in the radar and it will come back. And actually, per the 2022 Council conclusions on open science and research assessment, we are going to publish a study in March, prepared by our colleague Bianca Kramer, on exactly this topic regarding the development of publishing and the costs for open access publishing in Europe. So watch for this. It's quite interesting to see the increasing cost and the lack of transparency. And finally, of course, we, although we know that the large share of publishing is carried out by commercial publishers, we did know through these expert reports and other sources, of course, that there is an unclear and undocumented landscape of institutional publishing, which I think you're doing a great job of clarifying and documenting through your projects. So the goals then for these projects that we conceived of together was, of course, to understand this nebulous landscape until then of institutional scientific publishing at the operational level, of course, and the technological level, and of course to understand what is going on with monographs and book publishing and the relevant policies. Secondly, to enhance coordination, because we could, of course, understand that there were significant activities, but they were fragmented. So the aim, and again, I think you're doing very well in this realm as well, was to coordinate across Europe and empower those institutions who are having these activities, improve the quality of the services so that they're more desirable and more efficient, so creating efficiencies at the European level. And of course, technological, you mapped already, as we've seen, the problems, issues of interoperability, of fairness, of the different tools that are used or across, create a very fragmented landscape, which we wanted to address. With regard, of course, to services and to digital objects and their fairness, it was very important that these services finally ultimately are able to operate in fairness, create digital objects that are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable within the broader EOS ecosystem of services. And I think in this direction as well, I say that you're doing well. And of course, diversify the publishing ecosystem by enhancing this type of publishing, as well as with respect to the open access book policies, to accelerate and further help align the funder, especially policies for monographs and books. So these were the goals, and these were, and of course, in asking you for recommendations to have an understanding and map directions for the future for various stakeholders, including, of course, funders, the research institutions, etc. Our ultimate aims, of course, are in the context of the European research area, right, to increase equity, diversity, and inclusivity with open science practices in the era, and to increase the capacity of the EU R&I system to conduct open science and set it as the modus operandi of modern science, basically. So these are our broader aims. So my own understanding from the presentations and also from reading some of the deliverables and other presentations, webinars, and following, not intensely, I must admit, but I think at critical points and with critical deliverables that you've distributed the work of the project, is that in the present you are doing very, very good work and important work, also very collaboratively as asked in the call, and that's quite important to create efficiency, scale, and to not repeat unnecessary work. And also because, one thing does not go with the other. So you cannot go only with the technology or only with the more organizational, let's say, aspect of the work, or not only go with journals and articles and leave the monographs out. So these are part of the same system. So I think you have done and you are doing great work to document, as a first step, to document the landscape and understand where the problems, the bottlenecks are, but also as well as the possibilities. So all this work that have been done in the first year and a half and I think DIAMAS has started before the other projects, is very critical, and I think it's very extremely useful to chart the path for the future. We do expect, and I think we're starting to see this, that in their lifetime, DIAMAS and Craft OA will substantially facilitate the coordination at the European level of IPs and SPs or IPSPs, but it seems to me that my perception is that the first are the ones that are, when you don't have both the publisher and the service provider in one, that may be more vulnerable and that are the ones that need the most help. So I think having understood what the landscape looks like, having created a community, I think, of your own, which is also very important, you now need to be able to approach them, in steady steps and steady pace to support them gradually at the European level. And of course, yeah, this cannot be done in the context of only one project or only one project lifetime of 2 years, let's say, or 36 months. We understand that, and I think the Commission is all ears to further support in the future. But I think it is critical that you get to them, that the discussion goes to them, that you support them to improve their services, to lend more clarity to the landscape, to help institutions, understand the significance also of these activities that they have and they often have no clue about, and to support them to align the technologies to interoperate. And I think some of these conclusions come up from what Jan Erik presented earlier, which is great to see. And we expect Palomera to start facilitating the funder policy alignment and discussion among funders, a lasting discussion with respect to open books, monographs, and relevant policies. And I think I'm starting to see that, quite frankly. So this is very good. In the future, I think the time is ripe, and I showed some of the developments in the early slides, and a lot of you, of course, are involved also in operas and in the discussions about the Diamond European hub or the global hub or the national nodes. So these are all very, very good developments. So they're quite naturally fitting as a next step to what has been started by this project, and that's the big point. So how gradually to include those publishers of these archipelagos and give them the tools and the abilities to be more efficient, to be more attractive in the end. So that I see great potential here by what has been done, by your collaboration, and what I think will also be done in the future to improve significantly the quality and efficiency of the services of these publishers and of their service providers, and support institutions in becoming preferred publishing venues. I mean, in becoming more publications venues of choice by researchers increasingly more, and becoming better seen. And for all this, I mean, I think what I might be missing, and I'm not sure if this is because I have not followed very closely, and I would recommend, is an increased connection with the narrative and developments on research assessment, because this is not a separate discussion. I mean, you may build the technology and start helping the collaboration, but as I said earlier, publishing is a very critical activity for researchers, and it's very connected to the research assessment. So if the research assessment says that they should be publishing in journal impact factor journals or what have you, this is where they will be publishing. So I think to make the most of what you're already doing, it will be nice to make this link and find venues of collaboration there, if not already done. So this was my contribution. Hopefully I did not get out very far in time or exceed my time very much. So
thanks, Victoria. That was great. Margot, I think you may have a question for Victoria. And while you ask that question, I'm going to share my slides again, because I think there's another couple of Mentimeter slides to go
Victoria, when we analyzed the call for Craft.OA, we were actually relieved to see that research assessment was not asked from us. So it's, but of course, this is constantly in everybody's mind and head. And whenever we dive deeply into analysis, we know that it always comes back to research assessment. And I was relieved in a way to say we don't need to address that with our project design as well, because it's so big and you can't tackle flawed research assessment with technology because it needs to be deeper. But you're absolutely right that we need to keep our eye on it, even though it hasn't been asked neither from DIAMAS nor from Craft08 directly, for instance, to include a work package, because it would have exploded all our project designs. But it's and this is something, for instance, where we as the projects together with the funders and the European Commission, we need to join forces and move forward, because the journal can be as nice as it can be if the research assessment still is addicted to impact factor. It won't change a thing.
Yes,
So
of course.
that will take a long time, and I'm happy that you pointed it out.
Yes, no, it was not expected from the projects because there was a then subsequently separate call, but this is an opportunity, right? I mean, in the sense that, I mean, we're not saying do this in the context of the project, but you need to consider the relevant work done with Quora. And I see that Pierre wrote that several colleagues, what is he saying, are involved, or so this is great to see in work in some of the work groups that are there. But yes, so I mean, I think definitely the work done in Quora can inform your work, right? I mean, some of your activities and vice versa. But yeah, you just need to communicate, I think, and know what each other is doing and how you need to, how this work interacts to better create, better efficiencies overall. But these institutional publishers will, they're affected by research assessment. So obviously, I mean, we get some of the same for ORE. ORE is nice, but I need an impact factor. So there you go. So it's quite a critical element, so that you cannot ignore, not at all. Actually, you need to take advantage all in building your work. So the most serious obstacle to Diamond OA coordination is the fragmentation. I see that a lot. That's quite interesting, because we know that there's fragmentation. So, I mean, yes, but I guess that shows that maybe my perception was right. So the need coordinating the services, I think, is great, and the creation of your community, and also the point is now how also to get to the researcher, editors, and publishers of this work to further support it so that they can improve, so that they can, have the tools. But I guess this is something that you do gradually, as you've already started doing, and will do also in the future with the national nodes and the European hub, and gradually also globally. But of course, it's quite interesting. Slow intake collaborations.
Yeah, there's some really interesting responses. I
Yes,
think
yes.
that idea about skepticism, that there's going to be a fully fledged alternative, is also an interesting one. I think the sort of emotional barriers like skepticism or concern or fear come up. They don't come up as often as they should, but I think they underlie a lot of these kinds of concerns.
Yeah, no, quite interesting. Yeah, impact. Yeah.
And
No,
then the final question, where do you think the attention of funders should be most focused towards in the near future with respect to institutional or Diamond open access? So get your pitches in now, I think.
let's see what you want us to turn our attention to. And Niels is saying that research assessment is very important to address in the Palomera context. Yes.
Research assessment reform.
Interesting
First.
Yeah. Current research assessment is an easy excuse not to advance on specific dimensions of open sciences. And yeah, yes, also could be. Research assessment reform. Okay, yeah. Well, the Commission is doing a few small things, and maybe some, I think also some national publishers. I mean, we don't ask for the GIF anymore, for example. Yeah, help coordinate actors, infrastructure. Okay. Okay. I mean, it's a slow moving system. That's very clear. That's why a systemic change is a slow change. So, but we are in the beginning of this slow change process that will happen in the hiring process. Yeah. Okay.
And then I think this is the final question. Where do you think the attention of funders should be most focused in the near future with respect to books or monograph open access publishing? More focus on open educational resources would be welcome. It's an interesting challenge because my experience with open educational resources is that they're often quite specific to local projects or courses, and then how can you connect them to open textbooks is something it would be good to think more about. Building sustainable relationships with publishers and service providers.
Better support in access publishing, yeah. For books and monographs, thanks. Yes, okay. I mean, I think Palomera is a beginning to have funders, on the same table thinking about this as well. So it's not necessarily evident that they do so.
So
interesting. Again, the textbooks.
I think we could definitely keep going, but unfortunately we've hit our time. So I'm going to stop sharing the slide and just quickly share a final slide with some contact information. So if you want to contact anyone from the 3 projects, these are the email addresses that you need. And do stay in touch. There are other ways to stay in touch with the projects as well. There'll be there'll be websites, mailing lists, social media, lots of different ways to stay in touch. The recording of today's event will be available via the Operas YouTube, and the projects will all be sharing it, I'm sure, as soon as it's ready via their different avenues. And so I'd just like to say a huge thank you, firstly to our speakers for your time, for all of your sort of thoughts and everything that you've shared. And also to our audience members, not only for your time and for your attention, but also for participating via the Mentimeter and via the chat, and sort of trying to contribute to what we've tried to have a bit of a discussion today around the different projects and what we're creating. There will be another presentation in this series, at least one more webinar, if not more than one. So stay tuned for that. And other than that, just wish you all a great rest of your day, and thank you all very much for coming.